So tonight I want to talk to you about the man that Donald Trump does not want to fire.
I don't want to talk about that because I have no intention of firing him.
Mr. President.
He's talking about Jerome Powell. Jerome Powell is the chairman of the Federal Reserve, essentially the chairman of America's central bank. So why should you care whether Donald Trump wants to fire Jerome Powell or doesn't want to fire Jerome Powell? Here's why you should care. Several days ago, Donald Trump tweeted this. That's right, he called Powell a loser. He talked about how wonderful prices are. They're going down, according to Donald Trump. There's no problem there. His upset with Jerome Powell is that Jerome Powell won't, at his beck and call, lower interest rates. This is one of the central powers of the central bank. That is, the Federal Reserve has tremendous influence over interest rates. It has to use that influence to accommodate two goals set for the Reserve by the Congress. One goal is to keep unemployment low. The other goal is to keep inflation low, to keep prices stable. Those goals are sometimes in tension. And here, Donald Trump wants Powell to lower interest rates because he thinks it will be good for economic growth. The problem is, of the two primary objectives that Jerome Powell and the Federal Reserve have right now, that is keeping unemployment low, but also trying to bring the cost of living and prices and inflation down, the bigger problem today is inflation. And Trump's tariffs are making it worse. So if Trump's erratic tariff policy forces higher inflation, it will actually mean that Jerome Powell and the Federal Reserve will likely increase interest rates again. That will mean that your mortgage will be more expensive. It'll mean that your car loan is more expensive. It'll mean more financial pressure on you and your family. So we don't want to see interest rates go up. I'd love to see them come down, but I want to see them come down because they make sense. I don't want to see them come down and just spur further inflation. That's the worry if you change interest rates too quickly, too prematurely, when inflation is still a growing problem, then you just heighten inflationary pressures. So that's not the right answer. An independent judgment reflecting the circumstance of our economy, that's in our best interests. One of the reasons that Trump had this latest outburst against Jerome Powell is that Powell stated the obvious, which is Trump's tariff war is pushing prices higher. Trump's tariff war is making inflation worse. And so here Trump is taking actions that make the problem worse, that make an interest cut even more unlikely. That is the fundamental problem here. Why should you care? Well, when Donald Trump was attacking Powell, we saw your retirement savings go through the floor. We saw the market crash. Now, why would the market crash over comments like that? Because Trump's economic policy is already so scattershot, so inconsistent. The tariffs are on one week, they're off the next week, they're back on against a different country, they're doubled, they're tripled, they're negated. That uncertainty has really been crushing to the economy. If you add to that uncertainty over who will be the chairman of the Federal Reserve, whether the president will take a lawless action by trying to fire the head of the Federal Reserve, it creates additional uncertainty, additional volatility, which is why we've seen the markets up and down this week. So you add the inconsistency on tariffs to the inconsistency about whether the president of the United States will interfere with the independence of the chairman of the Federal Reserve and therefore what the Federal Reserve does. And it just causes markets to collapse and your savings to collapse. This kind of unpredictability, this kind of erratic economic policy by the president, tariffs on, tariffs off, Jerome Powell in, Jerome Powell out, harms all of us. It hurts all of us. But don't just take that from me. Here's one of the chief investment analysts at JP Morgan. I don't often quote or play a quote from JP Morgan, but I think this one was spot on.
This is the chairman of market and investment strategy for JP Morgan Asset and Wealth Management, the most powerful guy in research in the entire building. He said, here's the interesting thing about the stock market. It cannot be indicted, arrested, or deported. It cannot be intimidated, threatened, or bullied. It has no gender, ethnicity, or religion. It cannot be fired, furloughed, or defunded. It can't be primaried. It can't be seized, nationalized, or invaded. It's the ultimate voting machine, reflecting prospects for earnings growth, stability, liquidity, inflation, taxation, and predictable rule of law.
And there are broader impacts as well. And the broader impact is this. Around the world, people are losing confidence in America's stewardship of its own economy and therefore our role in the global economy. The International Monetary Fund is now projecting a slowdown in economic growth around the world owing to Donald Trump's tariff war. But not only that, people are fleeing the dollar. That is, they don't think the dollar is stable. They don't think it's a good, secure currency. And so they're leaving the dollar for gold. If you invested in gold, which few people have the luxury of doing, you've seen gold go up astronomically to levels we haven't seen in a long, long time, or maybe ever. At the same time, you're seeing the confidence in the American economic system go lower and lower and lower, which also means that countries around the world may choose not to invest in the United States, not to invest in our businesses, not to invest in our economy, but to invest in China's, to do more business with China. They consider China to be potentially a more stable business partner than the United States right now because of Trump's inconsistency on tariffs and now on whether Powell stays or goes. Now, the reality is it would be unlawful for Donald Trump to fire Jerome Powell. But we have seen lawless actions by this president before. For the last century, there's a Supreme Court precedent that essentially says the president cannot fire the chair of the Federal Reserve, cannot fire the heads of these independent bodies. And they're independent for a reason. They're independent because we want that bank to make decisions quite separate and apart from the politics of the matter. We don't want monetary policy driven by politics. There's plenty of politics in fiscal policy set by the president or by the Congress, but the Fed Reserve is supposed to be independent of those partisan pressures, and we don't want to change that now. So we all have a big stake in this because we have a stake in the American economy. We have a stake in the dollar remaining strong. That is a valued currency. We have an interest in making sure that people's retirement savings are safe and secure. We have a profound interest in bringing down the cost of living. That is, after all, what Donald Trump ran on and one of the central needs of the American people who can't afford housing, can't afford rent or their groceries or their medicine. So we have a particular and strong interest in making sure the Federal Reserve remains independent and that Powell isn't arbitrarily fired by the President of the United States.